Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. We're going to spend some time looking at a variety of different issues. Later this hour, we'll talk about the G7 summit and some of the tensions there because of the tariffs that President Donald Trump wants to invoke, and so that is certainly an issue. And in a conversation he had even with the Prime Minister, talked about the War of 1812. What's all that about? So we'll get into some of that. Also, some of the articles we've posted look a little bit more in depth about the decision that came down earlier this week, the Masterpiece Cake Shop decision having to do with religious liberty. Some think that it's the step in the right direction. Some think that it's a trail to tyranny. So, again, we'll get some of those perspectives. But I wanted to spend just a little bit of time talking about the voter rolls, in particular because I've had a chance to read first a press release as well as hear an interview that was done with Senator Don Huffines about this. Of course, also the governor has unveiled his plan to address school safety and a variety of other issues. So if you're not familiar with Don Huffines, he represents the 16th District in the Texas Senate. He was elected to the Texas Senate in 2014, and before that has served as a delegate both in 2008 and 2012 to the Republican National Convention. Of course, now serves as the vice chair of the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs, Border Security, as well as serves on a number of other committees, the Intergovernmental Relations Committee, Education, Administration, Natural Resource, and Economic Development. And Senator Don Huffines, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Oh, well, thank you for having me, Kerby. I hope everyone's having a blessed day.
Well, I appreciate the work that you've been doing behind the scenes. That's why I wanted to give our audience a chance to hear more about this. We've talked about in the past True the Vote. We've talked about how there are, I guess to be nice, voter irregularities. And I heard you on a talk show talking about this. And then, of course, I also have your press release plus an article written about you that says when you look at the voter registration rolls, we come up with a number of people who are not citizens on those rolls. And since, to be honest, some of these people are self-identifying this may be a bigger problem than we might have imagined, and that's why you want to act to begin to stop the problem of non-citizens voting in some of these elections. Tell us more.
Of course I will, Kerby. And let me just first preface this issue and everything else we're going to talk about by just giving you a little intro on how I govern and the lens I look through. And that is that our liberties come from God and not from the government. And, of course, our founding fathers knew that, and that's why they wrote a constitution that's specifically designed to restrain government, as they knew that one of the biggest threat to your God-given liberties is the very government they were creating. And one of the big things about being an American citizen, the privilege, I should say, as I was looking at the privilege to being an American, is the right to vote. And I think it's universal that everyone agrees that you need to be a citizen to vote. Certainly our U.S. Constitution and our state constitutions both speak to that. And I think it's pretty common sense that that's the case. Unfortunately, you don't have to prove you're a citizen to register to vote. It's illegal. You just check the box and say you are, and it's illegal to lie about that, and it's a felony to vote if you're not a citizen. But that is not keeping non-citizens from voting. And we've got evidence, and a lot of evidence, that a lot of them are non-citizens are voting and, of course, are registered to vote. And like you said, they're self-reporting. We're catching these folks when they self-report themselves at jury duty.
Of all places.
They go down. Yeah, think about it. They go down for jury duty, and the attorneys convince them that they got to admit if they're a citizen or not, and they do, and so they get excused from jury duty, and but they are obviously registered to vote, and so it's a big problem.
Well, and again, just to give people an idea, we have posted some articles that people can read, but even in your press release, I'll just use that one. Dallas County canceled the voter registrations of 1,889 individuals because they were non-citizens. And so people might say, well, that's only 1,800. First of all, that's enough to win an election. But as you point out, and I like to point out for people when they hear that number, those are just the people we know about. Those are the people that said, wait a minute, I'm not supposed to be on jury duty because I'm not a citizen. Wait a minute, you're on the voter rolls. And then of those 1,800, we know at least 356 of them actually voted. So we don't just have a situation in which we have people registered to vote but aren't voting. We have that, and they are voting, and those votes could make the difference. As you well know, some of these elections in the Dallas-Fort Worth area sometimes can be really very close, and this is why I think we need to pay attention to this. And it's not something that we can just wave away saying, well, that's just the problem we have because we can't keep good voter records. I think it's about time to clarify some of that and to begin to make sure that we have clean voter rolls, don't you think?
Absolutely. It's just common sense. And I'm going to be working legislation next session to that effect. And also, I want to work legislation that you have to prove citizenship to register to vote. I mean, if our Constitution says you need to be a citizen to vote, it's just, to me, like, again, common sense that you need to prove you're a citizen to register to vote. And so that's what we're going to be focused on, and hopefully we can get that through, get that done. But as you mentioned, this is a real issue. I just point out I sent a letter to our county election administrator, Tony Pippins-Poole, and she did respond back in Dallas County. This is Dallas County. That
Sure.
From 2011 to present, at least 174 voter registrations were canceled due to non-citizenship, and 22 non-citizens voted in 38 elections, and at least one individual has been voting since the 1980s.
Wow.
So, like I said, these are self-reported. The numbers you gave were for time periods before that. That's just in Dallas County.
Yes.
And we had a county commissioner's race. It just was decided in the runoff last week, a couple weeks ago, by 25 votes.
There you go.
So it definitely makes a difference.
Well, again, let's hope that you don't run into a lot of opposition, but I know how this goes because when we've even suggested that people have a valid ID when they go and vote, and I voted even today because we have a runoff election in my particular area, I have no problem handing them my voter registration card and my driver's license, but we are told that that's voter suppression. Can you imagine on this one where you have to show that you are a citizen in order to register to vote? You can just imagine the hue and cry that will be heard. So I want to give everybody kind of an advance warning because Senator Don Huffines will introduce legislation to address this issue. And as we've talked about on this program before, it's a bigger problem than you might imagine. And of course, when we looked at Houston a number of years ago with the True the Vote examples that we talked about with Kelly Shackelford and Catherine Engelbrecht and others, I mean, when they would take the time to find out, where are these individuals, and they would go to an empty lot, or they would go to 40 registrations in one home. One was a Burger King. It's pretty obvious that there is a potential for a great deal of mischief, and that's why I think it is time to address this issue. Need to take a break. When we come back, I want to get into a couple of other issues that Senator Don Huffines has been looking at, and certainly give you a chance to hear from him. And if you'd like to join the conversation, feel free to do so, 1-800-351-1212, or sit back and benefit from some of the material that we have. We have a link to his office as well as some articles that you might find helpful. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
As I've mentioned in various commentaries, mass shootings in America are on the increase. There are lots of theories that have been proposed to explain this dreadful phenomenon. Malcolm Gladwell has an explanation for these shootings that makes sense but is also very discouraging. He argues that we're in the midst of what could be called a slow-motion riot of mass shootings. Borrowing from the work of some sociologists, Malcolm Gladwell first argues that we should not look at these shootings in isolation but see them connected. Second, we should understand that the Columbine shooting set the cultural script. And third, we need to understand how each action lowers the next threshold. We can see this in an actual riot. The first person to throw a rock through a window lowers the threshold for someone else that might not have thrown a rock initially, but will now do so after the first rock was thrown. Then another person decides to loot the store. That lowers the threshold for the next person who might not have taken a TV in other circumstances. Each action lowers the threshold so that others who might not have taken action get involved in the riot. That brings us back to Columbine. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold set the cultural script. They had a website. They made movies. They spelled out their motivations. That made it easier for other potential shooters to follow their lead. One study found that a majority of school shooters in the 8 years after Columbine made explicit references to Harris and Klebold, and a majority of school shootings outside the United States were also versions of Columbine. The more discouraging part of his theory is that the threshold is being lowered so much that young men no longer need to be deeply disturbed to contemplate horrific acts. That seems to be what we're seeing, and unfortunately suggests that we will be seeing many more shootings in the future. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Pleased to have with us for a few more minutes Senator Don Huffines, representing the 16th District in the state of Texas. And one of the things I love about this new radio program that we have at this hour is before we go to the national program from 1 to 3, where we're on 300 stations. Here we're on just a few, and of course the primary one is in the state of Texas, and we'll probably pick up some more Texas ones so we can really focus some things on Texas politics. And so that has been kind of fun for me to bring in a number of people, whether it's Jeff Leach or Van Taylor. Of course, we've had some individuals that have been running for office like Angela Paxton and Candy Noble and Lisa Luby Ryan and many others. And we're just looking forward to the opportunity to spend more time talking about what will happen in the legislature. But even before the legislature convenes, I have in front of me, Don, the actual report from Governor Abbott on school safety. But also on your website, the reality is that the Lieutenant Governor, Dan Patrick, actually has appointed you to what's called a Senate Select Committee to study violence in schools and school safety. And as I understand, this summer you're going to be meeting and looking at those solutions. So first, the governor has put together a roundtable. Now, as I understand, you're going to be looking at some of those suggestions. So tell us a little bit more about what actually is going to happen in this area of school safety.
Of course, Kerby. Well, the governor actually unveiled his proposals, his 40 pages plus proposal for school safety last week here in Dallas. And it's comprehensive. It's a multifaceted approach to how we're going to fix school safety in his report. The Texas Senate, though, our Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick has convened a special committee to study this issue, and I am on that. And we're going to be meeting on Monday and Tuesday, and we'll be meeting multiple meetings between now and the first week of August when the Texas Senate will issue a report, too, on our recommendations for school safety. And let me tell you, we are focused, we are committed, and we will persevere with a sense of urgency to make this happen because this is hugely important. Obviously, there's nothing more important. I'm a father of 5, and I can tell you I take it personal, as does millions of other Texans. So we're going to get it right, and we're going to get it right as quick as possible.
You know, one of the things I like to do when we have these conversations is to say there's certain things we can do before the shooter does his evil act, and I mentioned that even in my commentary that's out today. Then there's some other things we can do after a shooter shows up at a school. And as I look at the plan by Governor Abbott, of course we won't have a chance to see yours until much later, it really is, I would have to say, multifaceted. Anybody that seemingly thinks that the only solution is to ban gun sales, first of all, does not understand the reality that even if you could ban every gun from now on, you still have lots of them in the society, and you still have individuals that probably intend harm and want to go to some soft target to carry out their evil deeds. So this particular plan by the governor is talking about all sorts of things from various kinds of grants, the presence of law enforcement at the schools, active shooter training, even the idea of hardening some of the campus facilities, as well as backing up and dealing with better mental health evaluations, first aid training, trying to come up with maybe a better campus Crime Stoppers program. Anybody that thinks that this problem can be solved by one piece of legislation or one particular action hasn't really looked at it in depth. And so you're probably going to have to spend a fair amount of time hearing from a lot of different individuals this summer, don't you think?
We are. We absolutely. We're going to hear from the experts across the state of Texas and the nation. And, you know, this is Texas. We like to be leaders, not followers. And I like to say our greatest days are yet to dawn. And we're going to make sure that we get this issue resolved. And like you said, it's multifaceted. On Monday, let me just give you a peek at what we're going to be talking about at the hearing on Monday and Tuesday. We're going to be looking at the facilities, the buildings, the
Yes.
campus, how the campuses are constructed in the buildings. And we'll be looking at everything from, the effectiveness of metal detectors to where the exits and entrances are, alarm systems. All of that's we're going to be discussing this coming up this week. And I've had a little bit of experience in my business career and with working with architects at design schools, so I'm excited to see what they have to say on Monday.
Well, again, if somebody that's in the listening audience wants to give you some ideas, recommendations, know more about the hearings, we have a link to your website. They can go to senate.texas.gov and, of course, then to Don Huffines. But they can contact you, can they? And will any of these hearings be open to the public where we could actually see what is being said and some of the testimony?
Absolutely. Every hearing's open to the public, and we live stream that. The Texas Senate does. And my phone number for my district office is 214-239-6131. Again, 214-239-6131. And my district office is in Preston Center. And I'm excited to hear from my constituents of if they have any ideas to make our campuses safer and make our students safer, because it's just such a critical issue that, and we're, like I said, it's a sense of urgency here to make sure by school starting in August we're gonna make our kids safer. And it reminds me, I remember when I went to public school, elementary school, that our doors opened right out to the playground to every classroom. And of course that was to let air in since there was no air conditioning. But unfortunately those days are behind us. But we're gonna look at the facilities on Monday and Tuesday designs and see what we can come up with.
Well, again, we have a link to your Facebook page, to the Twitter feed, as well as to your website. But just before we go, you also sit on the Veterans Affairs and Border Security Committee. Are there any things we can do in terms of border security? Because the two issues that I hear people talking about are school safety, and the other is border security. Can you help us with that at all?
Of course. Well, the state of Texas, we spend over $1 million a day extra on border security because the feds won't get it done. They're not securing the border enough. But thank goodness our president is focused on that, and that's one of his signature policies that he's going to continue to focus on, and I think it's getting better. but we are spending a lot of taxpayers' money on it. There's nothing more important than making sure Texans are safe in our schools, and safe from illegal border crossings. We need to stop illegal immigration, and we're committed to doing that. We're continuing to focus on different aspects of it. I think you're going to see emphasis in the next session in the legislature, which starts in January, on removing some of the magnets that attract illegals to Texas. That's always been emphasis down there, but we haven't gotten that done. Most people don't realize how expensive illegal immigration is to Texas taxpayers, but our school system, our healthcare system, our incarceration, it's billions of dollars annually.
Well, again, we've been talking with Senator Don Huffines. We have a link to his website. We have a link to the Facebook page, the Twitter feed, and a variety of other things. And again, we'll be on this school safety committee. So as they publish various reports, we'll post them. If you do a search, just a few days ago, we posted kind of a brief summary, which is not the whole 44 pages, but it turns out to be about 4 pages that I think does a very good job of summarizing Governor Abbott's gathering together in a number of different kind of roundtable discussions about how to address school safety. So those are some topics. And, of course, we also have information about the attempt by Senator Huffines in the future to stop non-citizens from voting in not only Dallas County elections, but around the state. You would think that would already be done, but that's just another illustration of a broken system that needs to be fixed. And so, Senator Huffines, I appreciate you joining us. I hope we can do this again soon.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for having me, and hope everyone have a blessed day.
Well, again, when that committee report comes out, we'll put that on the website and talk about it as well. And again, I would encourage you to find out a little bit more about those hearings. Perhaps you have some thoughts or comments or questions, and there have been certainly some people that have wondered where we're going in this regard, and not the least of which is, of course, the shooting in Santa Fe. It was just a harsh reminder of what the fact is. Some other things need to take place. And this evidence, as we cited just a minute ago from September 1999, 2007, 1,800 individuals on the voter registration rolls that are non-citizens, and given the fact those are self-reporting. In other words, these are people that are called to jury duty and say, wait a minute, I can't serve on a jury because I'm not a citizen. They go, but you're on the voter rolls. Well, yeah, can't I be on the voter rolls? No, citizens are supposed to vote. And then go back and look at those individuals and find a good number of them actually voted. And one individual has been voting illegally, if you think about it, since 1980. That's why we need to change some of the things that we have been doing in terms of voter registration and really clearing up the voter rolls. So just thought you might like to hear that from Senator Don Huffines. When we come back, I want to get into a couple of very important issues. So we'll talk about those. And if you'd like to join us at any point, 1-800-351-1212. The website is pointofview.net. And if you'd like to leave a message, you can also, of course, leave one because we broadcast as well on Facebook Live. You can leave a message there, and I'll try to read those as we go along. We got a lot to cover over the next couple of hours, so let's get to it. But we need to take a break to do so, and we'll be back right after this.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again, what are you doing to make a positive change? One way to start today is to join the Truth Team, Truth Team 360, and help us change lives. Our nation needs a Truth Team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, let me spend just a little bit of time talking about the reaction to the decision on religious liberty. And as we've pointed out on this program on a couple of occasions already, that indeed the Supreme Court ruled 7-2 that the Colorado Civil Rights Commission did not treat Jack Phillips appropriately, but they really sort of dodged the question as to the broader principle of if indeed a Christian has reservations about producing a cake, photography, a floral arrangement, whatever it might be for a same-sex wedding, will they have the freedom to do so? And so there have been a number of reactions, and so I thought for just a minute I would focus on those, and the piece that I have posted for you to read is by David French. And the reason he wrote this is the other day, of course, we were quoting from him, but then since then there have been all sorts of people that see kind of doom and gloom and say that the decision that came down, even if it's 7-2, is not encouraging at all. Now, David French does not mention one individual, John Smirik, who's on the program with us quite frequently, but even today he has Justice Kennedy's breadcrumb trail to tyranny. Whoa, John, calm down a little bit here. But nevertheless, he said, that we have activist courts trying to, in a sense, install their own religion. So I'm joining him at about mid of his commentary, in which he said the Supreme Court ruling in the Masterpiece Cake case reveals that we might well have such a regime that is just barely restraining itself from tightening the screws. It's figuring out how subtle or blatant it needs to be when punishing Christians for living out their faith. Indeed, the majority vote on this decision didn't defend the Christian baker's right to act according to his conscience. Instead, it simply said that the commissioners who denied him the right used biased language against religion. In comparing a Christian's belief in traditional marriage to the causes of the Holocaust, they proved a bit too, or a tad too, heavy-handed, he says. And he quotes from a legal scholar, Hadley Arks, who said, for years it was understood that the law need not be neutral towards religion and irreligion, that there were compelling reasons for the public good to encourage the religious life. But now, the legal scholar says, the claim is reduced simply to an obligation not to be indecorously nasty when the law refuses to respect religious convictions. So that gives you the idea. So that's why David French wrote the piece against the Masterpiece Cake Shop Killjoys, in which he's talking about all sorts of people. Andrew McCarthy, for example, who's been on the program with us as well, said it was a setback for basically liberty. Ben Shapiro, it's been a long time since he's been on, but he's been on with us as well, said that religious Americans should be worried. And one professor at Williams College, Darrell Paul, don't know him, maybe we should get him on sometime, he says that only profound naivete can spin the majority decision as a victory for religious liberty, which causes David French, who's been in studio with us before, to say, well, those are pretty strong words. But he's, I think, making the case that maybe we should understand that, yes, for now, the court did dodge the bigger issue, and that is what rights do Christians have, because it was so easy to focus on the Colorado Civil Rights Commission and some of the horrible things that they said about Jack Phillips and about religious liberty. So that is indeed the case. But let me at least make the case for David French. The article is posted. You can read it for yourself. But he makes 6 points. And I got about 6 minutes before the next break, so I'll break it down as quickly as I can so that we can cover it and then get on to some of the most incredible things President Trump has said this last week. But let's get to these real quickly. First of all, David French says Jack Phillips avoided disaster. As Winston Churchill said, nothing in life is so exhilarating as to be shot at without result. So again, the bullets were aimed at Jack Phillips, and they did not hit him. So that's something to be said, because a lot of people, as he said, when they heard the oral arguments, thought that this was going to be an uphill climb for the Baker Jack Phillips. he is indeed free to actually continue doing what he's doing and not face the penalty, other than the penalty of scorn that comes from some of the LGBT people. So, point number one, Jack Phillips avoided disaster. Point number two, to those who are convinced that Kennedy would rule differently in the absence of anti-religious animus, why didn't he do so in this case? He didn't have to decide the case on free exercise grounds. In fact, all the justices, he's the one least likely to avoid the smaller decision in quest for a bigger statement, because after all, he's the one that gave us the decision of same-sex marriage. So, second point. Third point that David French points out is, third, it may not be as easy to present the clean case as you think. Remember, many of these cases come out of state civil rights commissions that are highly ideological and often outright hackish, which I guess is a word. I never run across that. They're undisciplined and biased as a matter of course, and as much they are going to try to be more rigorous in the future. And, of course, that's an argument you could be making. You know, if I'm sitting on any of these civil rights commissions in any one of the states, and I take this seriously, and candidly, I'm not so sure how many of the people in these civil rights commissions take the Supreme Court decision seriously, but if they do, they'd have to say, you know, we just need to kind of back off a little bit on some of the rhetoric we're using at the very least. So that's the third point. Fourth point, even if you present the clean case, other plaintiffs have better First Amendment claims than Phillips. It was clear from his opinion that Kennedy intends to evaluate free speech claims on their specific facts, and many of the cases in the pipeline are more favorable on the facts than the Masterpiece case. And again, that's exactly what we've said. If you've listened to this program any length of time, you know that Kelly Shackelford joins us most Fridays, and if he's not here, sometimes one of his other associates like Jeremy Dice is here, even sometimes on the Millennial Roundtable, we have Chelsea Human, and to a person, they've said probably the better case was Aaron and Melissa Klein out of Oregon, in which you don't have all the animus other than you do have Oregon telling them that they had to pay $130,000 and they couldn't speak about the case. But in some respects, that might be a simpler and easier case to consider, and that could easily be accepted by the Supreme Court and could be decided in the next term or so. And by the way, might be determined by different justices, because by the end of this session, it's possible a Supreme Court justice might step down. So we'll see where that goes. Fifth, depending on Kennedy's retirement plans, and that gets us to our next point, it's highly likely that the next version of the case will be decided by a different Supreme Court. If Trump can appoint a Gorsuch 2.0, which would be another person like him, then the bullet dodge becomes the victory delayed. And then finally, he says Kennedy did not give people of faith a lasting gift. He rebuked one of the most common and vicious leftist talking points, that is, the claim that religious liberty is merely a pretext for bigotry, and if nothing else, responding to a Colorado Commission's argument that Phillips' religious liberty claims were a despicable piece of rhetoric, similar to arguments used to justify slavery and Holocaust. Kennedy said this: to describe a man's faith as one of the most despicable pieces of rhetoric that people can use is to disparage the religion in at least two distinct ways. By describing it as despicable, and also by characterizing it as merely rhetorical, something insubstantial and even insincere. So David French concludes by saying, in the future, when members of the media put religious liberty in scare quotes, when academics pontificate about past injustice, and when government officials echo their slurs, conservatives should remind them of Kennedy's words. They're not defending liberty, they're disparaging religion, and in certain circumstances, government officials are even breaking the law. Dodging a constitutional bullet, laying a minefield for activists in the future, paving the way for a better case before a potentially better court, rebutting the common progressive talking point. As David French says, not bad for a day's work at the Supreme Court. Yes, the killjoys may ultimately be proven right. Masterpiece Cake Shop may be a prelude to a disaster, but for now, I'm remaining optimistic. The future of free speech at the Supreme Court is so bright, I'll have to wear shades. Good turns of phrase there, if nothing else. So just wanted you to read that, because there's going to be certainly a number of articles that will come out, and some that already have, that are painting a doom and gloom. We will see. And it is not over yet. These battles never are really over. If there's anything I have learned after doing this broadcast for more than 30 years, and certainly being in ministry for more than 40 years, it is that every victory just is something that needs to be maintained in the future, and every defeat is certainly a desire for us to go back and bring about a victory. But there's never a completion. There's always the next battle on the horizon to actually stand for faith, for family, and for freedom. And, of course, that's what we talk about here at Point of View. Well, we've got a possible trade war, or maybe the desire by Donald Trump to renegotiate some of these tariffs. We'll talk about that right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Military chaplains have been leading prayer at military events for as long as this country has had a military. But one group wants the military to silence the prayers of chaplains. In February of 2017, a group sent a letter to commanders of the Air National Guard base in Peace, New Hampshire. The letter, signed by an attorney, had the look and feel of a legal demand letter, but while it tossed around legal lingo and cited a case or two, it stopped short of actually threatening a lawsuit. Nonetheless, their message was pretty clear. Prayer at official events violates the Constitution, is beyond the scope of a government entity, and is unnecessary and divisive, it said. Our friends at the Chaplain Alliance for Religious Liberty, a group of endorsers that speaks for about half of our armed forces chaplains, asked us to respond. Mike Berry, one of our attorneys and former Marine JAG officer, calmly explained that the Constitution, federal law, military regulations, and court precedent make it clear that not only may chaplains pray at official events, chaplains are protected when they do. The Air National Guard says the invocations will now continue. You should visit firstliberty.org and read the rest of First Liberty's letter. Military chaplains play an essential role and should never be censored or prohibited from providing invocations at official military events. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me cover a few things right now because this is going to be a really jammed next 2 hours. First of all, we've got Karla Akins with us. We're going to be talking about her book, A Pair of Miracles. We're going to get into, in some detail, the issue of autism. And so I hope that if you have a young person that is autistic or has Asperger's or a variety of other things, you will be with us, and we'll certainly try to minister to you in that regard and really share some of her own struggles that she has dealt with twins that were adopted that have significant autism. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. In the third hour, even though you will not be able to hear this on radio, you can certainly go online, either on Facebook Live or even on our website, pointofview.net, and listen to the live broadcast. We're going to first of all talk with Tom Gilson. I've mentioned this before, and so you've already had a little bit of a preview. 3 bogus LGBT talking points that relate back to this Supreme Court decision. So I just wanted to equip you to be able to understand some of those issues. And then before the end of that next hour, we're going to have Dr. Brent Guire, who is the Assistant Secretary for Health, talking about the opioid crisis. I would love to get him on for a longer time in the future, but that's what we have today. And I've heard him on another talk show. Matter of fact, I think it was Mark Davis. And I thought, boy, this is perhaps one of the most well-spoken individuals I've heard so far on the opioid crisis and the number of people that are dying from opioids, epidemics and overdoses and all that kind of stuff. And he's actually the Assistant Secretary of Health and Human Services. So that's pretty amazing. So we'll get him on for just a few minutes, maybe get him on more in the future. Let me take on Donald Trump for just a minute. There are 2 issues. Let's take the bigger issue and then the trivial one that still just is a head shaker. And that is the various leaders of the rich democratic republics are getting together. That's the best way to describe the G7 group. And the problem with that is that before this G7 summit, President Donald Trump and his administration decided to actually put some tariffs on things like aluminum. And that has caused at least a few of the participants a great deal of concern. So, for example, they're all headed to Ottawa, and the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and the French President Emmanuel Macron put Donald Trump on notice Thursday that they would not be intimidated at the upcoming G7 summit, as there is now kind of a looming trade war between Washington and some of the allies. Now, the G7 powers are Britain, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and the United States. And in the past, the controversy about the G7 summit has been you almost always have had these anti-globalist demonstrations that have taken place in Vancouver or Seattle, wherever they might take place. This place, of course, taking place in Quebec. Okay, so that's where the leaders are coming together. And again, the stance that comes from the Canadian Prime Minister and the French President is that they are saying that we don't feel like the United States is treating us fairly. And so they've even talked about whether we should rename the G7 summit as the G6+1. At one time when they had Russia, they talked about, G7+1. So in some respects, they're really wanting to try to marginalize Donald Trump. Now, interestingly enough, while both Macron and Trudeau have forged cordial relationships with Donald Trump, they made it clear that they would stand tall, especially in the face of U.S. duties on steel and aluminum imports from Canada, Europe, Japan, and Mexico. So there's a bit of tension taking place there. But the one that is kind of the head shaker is there was a phone call between the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, back a while ago, but it's only been reported now, and it was a conversation between Donald Trump and Justin Trudeau about the tariffs, and it's been described as a testy phone call. Well, Donald Trump hasn't said anything about it, but Justin Trudeau decided to do so before the summit, and according to the sources, Trudeau pressed Trump on how he could justify the tariffs, because the argument is that these tariffs are in place because Canada is actually a national security threat. And so that's when apparently Donald Trump quipped to Justin Trudeau, "Didn't you guys burn down the White House?" That is wrong at so many levels, I don't even know where to take them on. But let's take the historical one first. It was the British, first of all, that burned down the White House. The only way Canada's involved in that, because I had to think about that for a minute. How in the world could he have done that? It turns out that in some respects, the British attack on Washington was seen as a retaliation for the American attack on York, Ontario, which today is Canada, if you will. But at that time, of course, it was a British colony. But, you know, if he said that and he honestly believed that the Canadians burned down the White House, then he's historically illiterate. That's being kind. If he said it just to get a rise out of him, he's kind of a bit of a, kind of use the word jerk, but nevertheless, this one has certainly had a life of its own. If you type on Donald Trump 1812, or Donald Trump and the War of 1812, you're going to see all sorts of memes and other things. But I thought, if nothing else, I just kind of clarify that, no, actually, the burning down of the White House was in the War of 1812. If you don't know the history, it has to do with the fact that the British sailed up the Potomac River. They disembarked. They headed towards not only the White House, but they also tried to burn other buildings. The president at that time was James Madison, and if it weren't for the quick action of Dolly Madison pulling one or two of the portraits, in fact, the most famous portrait we have of George Washington, out of the wall and running towards the north, we wouldn't have some of that to this day. And just a little trivia point, we have to paint the White House white all the time because it was burned. If you've ever had a tour of the White House, they start at one end of the White House and begin painting it, and by the time they finish painting the White House, it takes so long that they have to go back and paint it again. So there is never a time when they're not painting the White House white, in part because the British, not the Canadians, burned them down. Nevertheless, just one of those pieces that just was such a head shaker, I just had to bring it up. It probably, in the light of history, means nothing, but it is funny that Donald Trump actually said, didn't you guys burn down the White House? No, let's, if we can, try to educate everyone, including maybe the president, about our history. And we'll also maybe a little bit later get into some other issues. One of those is a report that came from the federal government, which is telling us right now that Medicare and Social Security are going broke faster than we might have thought. And there's some very good reasons for that, so I'll cover that a little bit more in the future. We come back, though, I want to spend some time getting into the question of autism. Very important issue. We've only talked about this once or twice before. A number of years ago, I had Lisa Simmons, who, by the way, is the wife of Ron Simmons, who is a member of the Texas House. But she wrote a book called I Would Have Said Yes about her son who has autism. We're going to be talking today with Karla Akins, and they actually decided to adopt these two individuals. And Isaac and Isaiah were very far down the, what you might call the fetal alcohol disorder syndrome and spectrum. And so as a result, they're both autistic. And so we're going to spend some time talking about that. And it is a real concern because I've seen that 1 in about 68 children have been identified of being somewhere on what is called the autism spectrum disorder. So we'll look at that and try to give you some perspective. And if you know somebody that has a child with autism or Asperger's or maybe other intellectual challenges, maybe even Down syndrome, I hope you'll join us and hope you'll encourage them to tune in. That's our conversation in the next hour. We'll have that conversation with Karla right after these important messages.
If you've listened for any length of time, you've probably heard about Point of View listeners who've done amazing things, started ministries, found their life's calling, impacted their city, their state, the nation. But let me be clear, you don't have to have a huge impact to be faithful. I thought about that when I read a note from Joanne in Texas. She admitted, up until recently, I've not had much of a political view, nor have I ever been so informed. But since I signed up for your email and website information, I can now get the correct information that the public is oblivious to. Joanne ended by thanking us for the Take Action section of our website, where we make it easy for you to express your views on key issues with your elected representatives. Everything we do on the air, online, through mail and email is made possible through people like you who invest in Point of View so we can invest in issues that matter. Take your place on the Truth Team. Call 1-800-347-5151 or sign up online at pointofview.net/team. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. We're going to spend some time in this first hour talking about autism, and certainly would love to hear from some of you that have children that have some kind of learning difference, or maybe they have autism or Asperger's or other kinds of developmental issues, and we are certainly wanting to minister to you in this hour. As a matter of fact, in the last time we really talked about autism, we had Lisa Simmons in studio because we talked about her book, I Would Have Said Yes. Lisa Simmons may be familiar to some of you. She is the wife of Ron Simmons, who is a representative in the Texas legislature. She's also the mother of Ali Beth Stuckey, who's been on the Millennial Roundtable with us. So we will come back to this issue of autism in just a minute. But let me give you a preview of the next hour as well. Going to have, first of all, Tom Gilson with us as we're going to talk about some of the LGBT talking points. There have been kind of blowback and feedback since the decision earlier this week on the issue of the Masterpiece Cake Shop case having to do with Jack Phillips. So he's going to help us think through some of those issues. And then we also are privileged to talk about, for just a few minutes before the program ends, the opioid crisis, something we've talked about before. But we have the Assistant Secretary of Health, who is with, of course, the Department of Health and Human Services, Dr. Brett Guire, and he is an individual that I've heard on other shows talking about this, and we're thrilled to have a member of the administration address this issue of opioid addictions, overdoses, and the opioid crisis. So those will give you an idea of what we'll be covering over the next couple of hours, but let me introduce our guest. Karla Akins is the mother of 5, including these 2 twin boys who have autism, and we'll talk more about them in just a minute, introduce Isaac and Isaiah to you a little bit more. Has a bachelor's degree in special education as well as a doctorate in Christian education from Kingsway Theological Seminary, has spent decades both in homeschooling, private school, and public education, served as a minister for more than 30 years in a co-minister at Christian Fellowship Church in North Manchester, Indiana, and the author of this new book. It's published by our friends at Kriegel, A Pair of Miracles, the story of autism, faith, and determined parenting. Karla, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited. In Dallas.
Yes, well, we're not just in Dallas. We're all over the nation, so that'll be a great opportunity for people all over the country to speak to that issue. And again, this is an important issue because, as we've talked about before, 1 in every, 68 children have been identified as being somewhere along the autism spectrum. And you didn't expect to have to study all of this, but, of course, when you had 2 children that you brought home, all of a sudden you had to begin to think about that when they were not developing the way your other children were developing.
That's right. And actually the CDC just put out their new statistic. It's 1 in 59 children. And those are old numbers because the numbers don't come out. They come out years later. So these numbers are based on 2014. And so it's gone up 15% since 2014 released their numbers. So it just keeps growing and growing, and it's definitely something that we need to be aware of and figure out what is going on.
I would think so. And we'll get into some of those aspects. But again, the best way to actually begin is to start with your story. You bring two children home. You name them Isaac and Isaiah. Later, of course, you find out that they have actually begun down that spectrum of what we call fetal alcohol disorders, and we've talked about some of that before. But initially, you just expect them to be like any other child that you would have in your home or any other child you'd meet in the church nursery. But give us the rest of the story, if you might.
Okay, well, the reason we ended up adopting was because we were foster parents, and the agency that we were fostering with, we had a newborn baby that we had for 11 months, and they were having trouble placing him, and they wouldn't let us adopt him because we already had children. So we knew that after that heartbreaking experience, my heart is just not able to give up a baby after 11 months. It was just too painful. So we wanted to go into adoption, and so we had started already having our home study while we had that foster baby, hoping that they would change their mind and let us adopt him. But they stuck to their policy, and he went to a wonderful family. 3 months later, our social worker called us and said, hey, we've got a set of twins in the neonatal intensive care unit up here in Des Moines, and we need you to take a CPR class so you can take one of them home. And I said, well, can we talk about it? Can I talk to my husband about it? She goes, well, how much time do you need? Because I already put your name on the court order.
Oh, whoa.
Yeah. So we talked about it. We took, I called my husband home. He was up at the church in his office, and we lived in Iowa at the time. And we gathered the children around, and we talked about it. And they were kind of worried, too, that these babies would be taken away. And we had no guarantees, of course. But we just felt like this is, we're walking through the doors, and this is a door that God opened wide, and that we would take the challenge. So Isaiah came home first, and Isaac came home second. And we knew they were at risk because they were premature, and they had some suck, swallow, breathe reflex problems. They couldn't suck and swallow and breathe at the same time, so it took a really long time to feed them, and they would choke a lot, and, we had to be really careful. And they ate about every hour.
Wow.
It took them about an hour to, it's every 2 hours. It would take them an hour to down, just like 2 ounces, 1.5 ounces of formula, and then we'd maybe get a little bit of an hour break. But I immediately put them on the same schedule because I just was not getting any sleep. And as they grew, I knew something wasn't right because they would not calm themselves down. They had no ability. Most babies will learn to calm themselves, if you swaddle them or, you feed them and change their diapers, but that didn't ever happen. And this went on for 4 years where they just screamed nonstop. And I couldn't get any doctors to listen to me when I would say, there's something not right. And they would just say things like, well, they're twins, so you're probably not spending enough one-on-one time with them. Well, at the time, I was a homeschool mom. I was with them all the time. And I knew something wasn't right because I'd been a foster parent. I was the oldest of 4 kids. I'd raised a lot of babies and a lot of children, and I knew something wasn't right. Well, finally, I took them to a developmental psychiatrist, and she diagnosed them with autism. And the very doctor that said to me, oh, you're just not spending enough one-on-one time with them, called me and told me I needed to consider giving one of them up because there was no way I could raise twins with severe autism. It's like, seriously? They're not puppies. I'm not going to pick one. And, they're 4 years old by this point, Yeah. So that's how our journey began. But I was actually relieved at that point that there was a name for what was going on with them. And we don't know how much, with autism and fetal alcohol syndrome, there are some overlaps in how kids get upset and calm themselves down. But there were other symptoms that pointed to autism for these boys.
We'll take a break and continue our conversation as we talk about the book, A Pair of Miracles. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
As I've mentioned in various commentaries, mass shootings in America are on the increase. There are lots of theories that have been proposed to explain this dreadful phenomenon. Malcolm Gladwell has an explanation for these shootings that makes sense but is also very discouraging. He argues that we're in the midst of what could be called a slow-motion riot of mass shootings. Borrowing from the work of some sociologists, Malcolm Gladwell first argues that we should not look at these shootings in isolation but see them connected. Second, we should understand that the Columbine shooting set the cultural script. And third, we need to understand how each action lowers the next threshold. We can see this in an actual riot. The first person to throw a rock through a window lowers the threshold for someone else that might not have thrown a rock initially, but will now do so after the first rock was thrown. Then another person decides to loot the store. That lowers the threshold for the next person who might not have taken a TV in other circumstances. Each action lowers the threshold so that others who might not have taken action get involved in the riot. That brings us back to Columbine. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold set the cultural script. They had a website. They made movies. They spelled out their motivations. That made it easier for other potential shooters to follow their lead. One study found that a majority of school shooters in the 8 years after Columbine made explicit references to Harris and Klebold, and a majority of school shootings outside the United States were also versions of Columbine. The more discouraging part of his theory is that the threshold is being lowered so much that young men no longer need to be deeply disturbed to contemplate horrific acts. That seems to be what we're seeing, and unfortunately suggests that we will be seeing many more shootings in the future. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation today with Karla Akins as we talk about her new book, A Pair of Miracles, a story of autism, faith, and determined parenting. It's published by Kriegel. You might be able to find it in your local bookstore, but we also have a link on our website, pointofview.net. And Karla, you were talking about finally getting a name for it. I know how important that is for parents, and a lot of this was happening long before you had things like Autism Speaks and other organizations out there. Those of you that were pioneers, we had the same kind of conversation years ago with Lisa Simmons. You don't even know what this is. You know there's something wrong. The doctors are telling you there's nothing wrong. You know there's something wrong, but you don't have a name for it. But getting a name for it then kind of starts a whole grief process, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. You don't, I think for us, we were just in such a survival mode that we didn't grieve that much, probably not as much as a typical family might. I was just mostly relieved that I had a name for it. The grieving came a little bit later, and grieving comes in cycles. Sometimes it hits me really hard even now. They're 23 years old. They still live with us. And, you know, they probably won't marry. They probably won't ever have children. And it's those, you know, lifelong dreams that you think about. But they brought us so much joy, and I'm in such awe of them that it has comforted me in many ways. But, yeah, and when you do get that diagnosis and you do realize your child is not, quote-unquote, typical, it's a lot to take in, and you have to be patient with yourself and let yourself feel all the feelings you're feeling. And one of the things I learned to do was wrestle with God with the hard questions and not be afraid to ask him. It's not like he doesn't already know what I'm thinking. So there are times when I would just go in my bathroom and just cry by myself. And
yes,
I didn't always ask why, but I would ask, how much am I supposed to take? Because there was no support in those days. They were born in 1995, and people really didn't know that much about autism yet. The most that people knew was, Rain Man, the movie. Well, my boys aren't savants by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, they're mildly intellectually impaired. And they didn't speak. My boys didn't speak for 7 years. They didn't potty train till they were almost 8 years old. And I'm one of the blessed ones because my boys have made such great, great, great progress. But I have friends who live in isolation because they have adult children with autism who they can't take anywhere. They can't go on a family outing. They're not potty trained. They don't speak.
Yes.
Because the autism is a spectrum disorder, and it's so wide. And I feel really, really blessed with what my boys have been able to accomplish. That's why I call the book A Pair of Miracles, because every step of the way, the one thing I did, when I cry out to God in those hard moments is, send me help. I need help. And that's hard first because I'm very self-reliant, always have been. I was a homeschool mom, I was used to doing things by myself. And I had to widen my net of support and my willingness to humble myself and say, I don't have all the answers. I need help here. I need someone to come in and help me with these boys because it was just eating us alive. Autism itself was just this monster that was just eating us alive. Because these boys, when they were little, they would be thirsty, okay, because they had because of their sensory processing issues, they would be so thirsty, and I'd give them a cup and they'd throw it at me. It was just that type of them not being able to figure out the situation because me just getting in their space to hold them a cup was created such great anxiety for them.
Yes.
And so we had to do weird things as a family. Like I learned that if we ate in the kitchen, the rest of us ate in the kitchen. I had 6 kids at that time because I was raising my nephew. And I learned that if I would we would spread tablecloths on the floor and put their high chairs in the dining room and let them eat in the dining room while we ate in the kitchen. It was just weird stuff like that you had to just accept, okay, this is what our normal is. Our normal is that the twins eat in the dining room by themselves, throw food all over the place, while we eat in peace in the kitchen. And that felt so wrong, But they eventually grew out of that. Now they eat. They don't throw things. I don't have to put tablecloths down anymore. But for a while, our normal was just so different from everybody else's. The things that we had to do in a day were just so different from anyone else's. So, yeah, the mourning, so you mourn that. You mourn getting to just be spontaneous. To this day, my husband and I can't just take off and go somewhere. We have to make elaborate arrangements, or we take the boys with us, which is still fun. Our guys are a lot of fun. We really enjoy them, thankfully. We enjoy their company, and we get a big kick out of taking them to a movie and just watching them watch the movie because they're so funny, how they react to funny movies and things. And God gives you a new normal, and that doesn't mean you can't be sad for what you might think could have been. That's okay. God gets that. He created you. He knows you inside and out. But I've learned to be thankful for the new normal and to count my blessings. And really that's the only thing that you can do is count the victories, count the blessings, and just keep praise on your lips no matter what. There's always something that you can find to be thankful for in a day. And it's not easy. You have to really train your brain to do that. It's like a muscle that you have to train. But sometimes you're just so low and so down that I don't know what I'd have done without the grace of God. I really don't.
So we can maybe deal with a couple of misconceptions. One that you've already alluded to is some people with autism have relatively high IQs. You talk about one friend who has a teen son with Asperger's, a very high IQ. Others are not all cognitively impaired. And also back to something else you mentioned just a minute ago, because this could have been brought about by what's called fetal alcohol disorder. I don't want to get into it too much, but, you know, if a pregnant mother is drinking all the time, maybe an alcoholic, enters her bloodstream, it crosses the placenta, but the concentration in their blood goes up so much higher that it affects their brain. It even affects their facial features, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And I'll be honest, I'm not real clear on what time of the pregnancy different things affect. I don't think they really know. But really, just don't drink. Just don't drink when you're pregnant. Don't use drugs. Don't smoke, because your baby needs every chance it has to develop into a beautiful baby without, you know, life is hard enough without a cognitive issue. My boys do have dysmorphic features. One of the symptoms can be ptosis in the eye, which one of my boys has. And he has a sling. What that means is he's missing a muscle in his eyelid. In the sling, he's got an implant that holds his eyelid open for him. But when he's tired, he just can't hold it open anymore. And for a long time, that's how I could tell them apart, because they are very identical twin boys. And they're very different in their personalities, though. Totally different personalities, but they look exactly alike. I can't tell them apart from behind. I can tell their voices, and I can tell their faces, but if they're walking away from me, I can't always tell which one is which to this
It's amazing.
day.
Yeah, when you can fool a mother, you know they're really identical twins. I've got identical twin nieces, and the way we told them apart was primarily personality, too, because Julie's the life of the party, and Sarah was kind of like Eeyore, because they just looked so much alike, and even Mom sometimes had difficulty. But I need to take one of those mandatory breaks, and when we come back, I want to spend some time getting into a couple of other issues, you know, because we've already sort of alluded to the challenge that the Akins family has had to deal with. And if you would like to connect up with her, we also have a link to her website. It is karlaakins.com. You don't even have to spell it out, because we've got a link there, and it has information about the book. And if you already would like to get a copy, or some of her other books, A Pastor's Wife Wears Boots, or for example, Oh, Canada, Her Story, The Missing Codex, all sorts of things. We have lots of books that we can talk about, and will in just a minute. We have a link on the website, pointofview.net. If you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to get a copy of the book, again, look for it in your local bookstore, but if not, it's available both in paperback and Kindle, and we have all that information on our website, pointofview.net. But I suspect some of you out there would like to join the conversation, share your own story, or ask a question. Maybe you're in the midst of some of this and would like to hear from Karla. Let's open up the phones. 1-800-351-1212. 1-800-351-1212. As we talk about autism, faith, and determined parenting. That's the subtitle of the book, A Pair of Miracles. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net. Or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Again, the book is entitled A Pair of Miracles, a story of autism, faith, and determined parenting. Karla Akins with us, and if you'd like to join us, let's open up the phones, 1-800-351-1212. Published by Kriegel. You might be able to find it in your local bookstore. But, Karla, for just a minute, I wanted to broaden it because there is, I think, some very important information in this book that would help any parent, no matter where your child is along a spectrum. I love what you said. I've become a little wiser in my dealings with experts. And one of those is that you're an expert on your child. You've already shared how the doctors say, oh, no, you just need to spend more time with the twins, or they'll get over it, or, if they're screaming, they're just having a temper tantrum, they're going through the terrible twos, whatever. And then you also go on to talk about God's supernatural wisdom is greater than human wisdom. Your child is unique. God makes divine appointments. These are really important principles for anyone that has a child. So if you're a parent or a grandparent, I think you'd benefit from this book, don't you think?
I think so. I wrote the book. I wanted to share the miracle of the boys. And I think the book is just an encouraging book. It shows how we went through what we went through, but I didn't want people to not know what it's like to wrestle with God and come out okay, and that He's okay with that. But I also wanted to give practical advice. Not that I have mastered anything by any means. I am fallible, and I'm the chiefest of sinners, and I am not Mother of the Year by any stretch of the imagination. But I wanted to share what worked for us, and I had seen too many parents giving up on their children in terms of behavior or thinking that limiting their child and what their child can accomplish. And one of the things that I do address in the book is how to deal with experts in the field. You're the expert on your child. Don't quit until you get an answer. And now that I'm a special education teacher, I wish more parents would speak up for their child in school, because I can only speak up as loud as the parent does as the special education teacher, because the way schools are designed now is full inclusion. And special education teachers have now been relegated to more of case managers, not teachers. So what that means is we push a lot of papers, and we develop these plans that the general education teachers have to follow. But when the general education teachers don't follow it, if the parents don't care, the teacher's not going to care. And most teachers, by and large, don't get me wrong, most teachers are wonderful. But a lot of teachers just don't understand. They didn't go to school to be special education teachers. So they don't really understand the needs that particular child has. Plus, their classes are so large.
Oh, yes.
And they have so much on their plate that unless you as a parent become a squeaky wheel, you're not going to be on their radar necessarily. And I'm not saying be obnoxious, but one thing I wish I would have done and wish I had done better when the kids were in public school, which was from preschool through first grade. They did kindergarten for 2 years and then went into first grade, and then I pulled them out and started a cottage school when they were in second grade. And I homeschooled them along with about 15 other students that needed an alternative setting to go to school. And so what I wish I had done more is ask clarifying questions that led the teachers and the social workers, the principal, the therapist, to come to their own conclusion about it in a way. I mean, there's a way to ask questions in a way to help them, the professional, take ownership of an idea. And I wasn't very good at that. I was not a Donald Trump. I was not the art of the deal type of person at getting people to do what I needed them to do for the boys. And don't be afraid to step up and be a voice for your child, because I'll tell you, those gen ed teachers, they want to do the right thing. They just don't always know what it is. Right. And me as the special ed teacher, they just think I'm just being I don't know, too passionate or whatever. They don't really take me too seriously, but when the parent speaks up, that's when change happens.
Well, again, you have a whole section here on working with the medical community, but let's take some phone calls first, and we'll go to Kansas, KNEO. Angie, tell us your story.
Hi, I am a biological parent to one who is 16, has autism and mental retardation, or IDD, and stepmom to two other teenagers with varying levels of autism and severe ADHD. And so I can fully relate to what all you've been talking about.
You're a busy lady. And actually, my
yes, we
biological, yeah, you are. My biological sons and my husband have ADD. So, I mean, your normal is not a lot of people's normal. And just embrace that. And I just, man, my hat's off to you because you are very, very busy. Sometimes I wonder if I developed ADD myself with working with so many, people in my family with ADD, because you kind of rub off on each other after a while. And I should say, good for you, and get a good sense of humor, because that will get you through just about anything.
How are the teenagers doing right now, Angie?
Well, actually, two of them are at Bible camp south of Joplin, and one of them is visiting his biological dad. They're all in high school. My biological one is in a fantastic placement in high school for autism, in a very small group. The other two are in mainstream classes and doing very well.
Very good. Well, we're barely getting the cell phone signal, but I think we got picked up some of that. And just a good illustration, Karla, why you wrote the book, because this is maybe more prevalent than we might imagine now that you're saying that the latest CDC number is 1 in 59. I imagine that given the audience that we have here, all sorts of individuals find themselves in your situation or Angie's situation. So let's come back to that idea of experts, because in the middle of the book, you have tips for working with the medical community. Find doctors who will respect and listen to you. Do whatever it takes to accommodate your child. Embrace the familiar. Speak up is what's one of the things you were saying just a minute ago. You recognize that there is just a real need for you to be an advocate for your child and not take one statement from one doctor or nurse as gospel truth, but do the research and continue to try to find answers for the circumstances that you might find with your children.
Right. Yes. I mean, I just, I have moms that call me in my job, and they're questioning themselves. And I just always say, go with your gut. And for us that are Christians, we know the Holy Spirit can tell us and minister to us and show us what we need to do. And trust that. Trust your gut. If you think something's wrong, something is wrong. God gave parents this authority and this ability to know what their children need, and don't doubt yourself. Don't doubt yourself. If something's wrong, keep looking for it. Just don't quit on finding the answer.
Very good. What about some of the medical issues? You have a chapter there about diets, vaccines, and medications. I know you're not a doctor. I know you don't have an MD. I'm not asking you to be an MD or an RN or whatever, but you have certainly had a chance to think through and heard a lot of people say, well, if you just did this, can you give us some guidelines there?
Well, as far as vaccines go, there is still this belief out there by some parents who had perfectly healthy little people in their lives, and then they saw them just slip away. And whether or not vaccines coincided at the same time someone would slip away, I don't know. But I guess I kind of wonder, what are the chances of that? So many stories of that. I think there's also the issue of some parents find diet is a real helpful thing. Getting off of gluten, getting off of sugar, that type of thing. For us, it didn't work. I tried everything. I took them off of dairy. I took them off of gluten. I took them off of many, many things. We did, vegetarian. We tried everything. That did not help. If autism is manifesting as a result of an allergic reaction to food and environment, it will help. But if your autism is a result of something else, it's not going to help. And I'm, like I said, you said, I'm not a doctor, but there's been a lot of studies of the brains of people with autism, and they just look different, and different parts of the brains fire differently.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the part of the brain that reads facial expressions doesn't light up when it's supposed to, and different things like that. And it is such a spectrum disorder, you know, with my friend who has her son does not function, even though he has a very high IQ, he's in the 150s, he doesn't function socially as well as my sons, who have an IQ in the high 60s, low 70s.
Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Military chaplains have been leading prayer at military events for as long as this country has had a military. But one group wants the military to silence the prayers of chaplains. In February of 2017, a group sent a letter to commanders of the Air National Guard base in Peace, New Hampshire. The letter, signed by an attorney, had the look and feel of a legal demand letter, but while it tossed around legal lingo and cited a case or two, it stopped short of actually threatening a lawsuit. Nonetheless, their message was pretty clear. Prayer at official events violates the Constitution, is beyond the scope of a government entity, and is unnecessary and divisive, it said. Our friends at the Chaplain Alliance for Religious Liberty, a group of endorsers that speaks for about half of our armed forces chaplains, asked us to respond. Mike Berry, one of our attorneys and former Marine JAG officer, calmly explained that the Constitution, federal law, military regulations, and court precedent make it clear that not only may chaplains pray at official events, chaplains are protected when they do. The Air National Guard says the invocations will now continue. You should visit firstliberty.org and read the rest of First Liberty's letter. Military chaplains play an essential role and should never be censored or prohibited from providing invocations at official military events. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Karla Akins with us for a few more minutes. And Karla, just before we get back to the book, let's talk about what's available on your website, KarlaAkins.com. Of course, we have a link there as well. You have your books, and I've mentioned a few of the others, but especially this book, A Pair of Miracles. Also, some other information about speaking, if somebody'd like to have you come and speak at a conference. Work with me in terms of tutoring. Even loving the section there on more, because you got a picture of your motorcycle, and I love that pink helmet. I know you love to ride a motorcycle, so there's all sorts of ways in which people can connect up with you. But talk about some of the resources available when people land on your website. Guess you had to head off. There she is. Go back. Yeah.
Couldn't hear you for a little bit.
Yeah, there we go. Well, what would we be able to do in terms of finding on your website, KarlaAkins.com?
Yes, it's Karla Akins, Karla Akins, and it has my books, and then it also has an area of topics that I travel and speak about. I have a blog that I write on regularly, and I blog a lot about special needs, writing, that type of thing. And then if you have any questions, I love answering questions. Just contact me there. I have a way for you to contact me. All my social media is there. I'm very active on Twitter and Instagram and Pinterest and Facebook. So you can find everything you wanted to know about me on KarlaAkins.com.
Let's, if we can, just for a minute, help some of our parents who right now are probably trying to decide whether they have a child with developmental challenges or not. Public school, private school, homeschool, you've got a chapter on that. Also, your chapter on a little cottage school on the prairie. You quote from Charlotte Mason. That's somebody that has been very influential to those of us that have developed some of these classical Christian schools as well as homeschool. And it does seem to me that you had put together a cottage school. So talk about that, because I think right now some listeners are thinking, I really am beginning to wonder if there is a better alternative to my child than the public school system because of whatever. And it could be ADHD, it could be autism, it could be Asperger's, it could be various environmental sensitivities, it could be the way in which they interact with kids or the fact that they're being bullied or whatever it might be. Talk about how you've had to think through some of those issues and how maybe we can learn vicariously from you.
Well, the years that I had my cottage school, which was almost 7 years, are some of my happiest memories. After I pulled the twins out of public school, I had already been homeschooling my other children. I just knew that we needed something different. And so I started talking to some homeschool moms that were kind of burned out, and we got the idea of having a cottage school. So I asked my church. My husband's a pastor. In fact, he just stepped down from pastor in Christian Fellowship last Sunday, and we had been there 19 years. But I asked my church if we could use the church building for that, and they said, oh, sure. So what I did was I based it on a type of a Charlotte Mason style in that it was very integrated into nature, and the spine of our studies would be what we studied in history. But I took the kids outdoors as much as possible. We had 3 recesses, even the high school kids, because I had high school kids coming in that had been bullied so badly they couldn't even hold their head up.
Yes.
I am not exaggerating at all. All they could do was sit and look at their hands. They couldn't speak to me. They couldn't do any. They were bullied that badly. And I'm proud to say that by the time they graduated, and they did graduate as seniors from my school, they were outgoing, look you in the eye, give you a firm handshake type boys. And I'm really, really proud of that part. But I also had kids with emotional disabilities. I had kids with cognitive impairment. I had kids that were behind in reading, and I love to teach reading. It's one of my favorite things to teach. And it was like a one-room school, but I taught every student where they were. So wherever they were, whether it was preschool or 12th grader, we all studied the same thing, but we studied it with the standards that they needed for their grade level. And that's kind of a gift that God's given me, is differentiation. And I get really frustrated when teachers just look at me kind of sideways like, you can't do that. And I'm like, yeah, you can. You actually can. You just got to try it. It's boatloads of fun.
That's the way we used to do it in the public school system not so long ago, you know.
I know.
About it. Yeah.
Exactly. So we did a lot, every to introduce them to their history. I would take them camping for like 4 or 5 days, intense. And that introduced them to the idea every year, reminded them what it was like to live without electricity. But it also got them out in nature, which we don't do enough anymore. Kids do not get to go outside enough anymore. They don't even know where to find dirt. And it's just sad, you know. It's just so sad. And I was fortunate to grow up with a grandma that lived on a farm, and my favorite memories are playing outside, running in the pasture, wading in the creek, collecting fossils in the creek, you know, Indian arrowheads, because I grew up down in Wichita, Kansas, but my grandma lived in Arkansas City, Kansas, which was a little further south. And I just grew up being outside in nature a lot, and too many of our kids today don't even want to get their hands dirty. But I kind of forced them to do that. So we did that, and every chance we got, every Friday was either a field trip day or a fun type day, like maybe we would have a pajama party and read books all day, and usually at least twice a month we have wonderful state forests where I live. So we'd go to the state forest, and we kept nature journals, and we collected leaves. And my kids were able to recognize the names of plants and the names of trees and birds. And it was so cool because we went up to where Jean Stratton Porter has her, it's called, I can't remember what it's called now, but something big woods, and she's got these huge trees up there. She was a writer back in the late 1800s, and she wrote about nature a lot. She wrote Girl of the Limberlost, and that's about a place in Indiana. So we went up there, saw the Limberlost, and
there's a lot of great opportunities.
Cute.
Yeah.
Oh, it was awesome, and it was so cute because my little kindergartners were going, and that's a Jack in the Pulpit plant. You know, and the guys were just so impressed with how much my little guys can learn names of plants just like high school kids.
Well, we're just about out of time, and let me just mention again that you can find out a lot more about you at KarlaAkins.com, Karla with a K. And again, I'm sure there's some men saying, a woman that likes to go out in nature, likes camping, likes to ride a motorcycle. Where can I find one of them? But anyway, just great stories. And again, all of it available at the website. And again, author of the book, A Pair of Miracles, Story of Autism, Faith, and Determined Parenting, published by Kriegel. And Karla, thank you so very much for sharing your story. I hope it will be an encouragement to parents and grandparents who are wondering what to do with some of the challenges their kids are facing. And so thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was my pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll focus some time and attention on how to respond to this decision that came down this week on religious liberty. Tom Gilson will be with us a little bit later. We'll have the Assistant Secretary of Health and Human Services on the opioid epidemic. Got a lot to cover still. We'll do that right after this.
Point of View turned life right side up for Emily's children. Emily listens in Illinois. She and her husband blissfully sent their children off each day to what she called our small, quaint public school, until Point of View led them to watch the documentary Indoctrination. She said, "We came to realize the need for us to educate our children at home. We want their education to be built on the solid foundation of Scripture." Emily said that would not have happened were it not for Point of View's bold consistency of shining light on public education. Your support for Point of View changes the future for children like Emily's. It leads people to start schools and ministries and businesses that change lives. How has the Truth Team impacted you? Please invest to bring truth to other families like Emily's. Support Truth today. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Earlier this week, we, of course, had the decision that came down on the Masterpiece Cake Shop decision, and we've spent some time talking about this. We had sort of a roundtable discussion, quoted a little bit from various commentators, including David French yesterday, and we're going to mention that again a little bit later this hour. But one of the pieces that I felt very helpful was a piece by our friend Tom Gilson. It's entitled 3 Bogus LGBT Talking Points, and it has to do with how to respond to some of the comments coming out after this decision on religious liberty. And so I've certainly kind of taken our way through that, but I thought it'd be nice if we could get Tom on, and he's able to join us now. He is the senior editor of The Stream and also is an individual that has written a very good resource for you called Critical Conversations, a Christian Parent's Guide to Discussing Homosexuality with Teens, because a lot of them sort of say, well, you know, I may not necessarily have same-sex attraction, but who am I to say they can't marry somebody of the same gender and those kinds of issues? So very well done. Also, chief editor of True Reason, Christian Responses to the Challenge of Atheism. And if you're not familiar, we also have a link to his blog, Thinking Christian Blog, and is the author of this particular article in The Stream. It's all available at our website, pointofview.net. Tom, always great to have you on the program with us.
Thank you, Kerby. It's great to be here.
I have sort of talked through your article, but let's do it again. And I think what kind of got it started is that you saw some of the comments from Rachel Tiven, who's the CEO of Lambda Legal. That's kind of the LGBT legal group. And one of those was this idea of equality. Now, you'd have to agree, Tom, that one of the reasons why this idea of same-sex marriage becoming kind of the norm is because it was all pitched as marriage equality. And who's not for equality? And as I'm driving, sometimes I'll see in a car in front of me a bumper sticker that just has the equal sign. Well, she uses this idea of equality, but you come up with, I think, a very good idea that equality can't be a ruling principle because, first, everyone believes in marriage equality, and no one believes in marriage equality. It has to do with where we draw the line. Explain, if you might.
Sure. Yeah, this whole equality thing, by the way, they were so savvy strategically to come up with this because it is such an emotionally powerful word in American language and history, you know, from the Declaration of Independence through the Civil Rights era, and it's a great word. But they're misusing it. Here's the deal: is when I say that everyone believes in marriage equality, what I simply mean is that we all believe that marriage should be applied equally within certain limits. And for me, those limits would be that it should be a man and a woman of a certain age of consent, and meeting certain other minor legal requirements. For gay marriage advocates, they would say that extends to, pretty much the same thing, except it doesn't have to be a man and a woman. It could be two same-sex persons. Well, we all believe in marriage equality up to a line. Past that line, no one believes in marriage equality. I don't believe in marriage equality in the sense that marriage is equally available and equally right for incestuous couples. and neither do they. So at that point, neither of us believes in marriage equality. And when we get into the conversation about this, what we will find is that inevitably we will be not discussing whether equality is right or wrong. We'll be discussing the line at which it's right or wrong. And as soon as we find ourselves discussing the line, then we're in the right place for the conversation. We can set aside this emotionally charged word of equality and talk about when is marriage right and when is marriage wrong. Equality was never the issue. They're just battering us over the head with it. But
Yes.
It's never been the issue.
Well, and again, what they will oftentimes say, and of course, I get involved in these discussions and teach on this sometimes in terms of the difference between our view of marriage. And even one of our latest booklets is on homosexual theology and the rest. Is they say, well, you're drawing the line arbitrarily. It wasn't until I read your piece I realized, no, wait a minute. If there's a place where you could argue that they're actually the ones drawing the line arbitrarily, it's not so arbitrary when you recognize that you need a man and a woman to have children. It's not arbitrary when you recognize that for thousands of years, not just decades, not just centuries, but for millennia, every civilization has drawn the line as marriage as one man and one woman, that you realize that they oftentimes accuse the traditionalists or the Christians of drawing the line arbitrarily, when actually they're the ones that are drawing it arbitrarily. And I never really thought about that until I read your piece.
Yeah, and that's exactly what's going on is, let's have this argument over where the line is. There are very good reasons for marriage to be for a man and a woman. It's very good for families. Oh, my goodness. It's very good, and I know you've talked about that often enough. Good for society. Good in many ways. And to change the definition not only affects the one or two or 1,000 or whatever couples that get married under the new rules, it also changes the whole meaning of marriage and makes it actually more challenging for men and women to succeed in marriage. So the line belongs where it's always been. Meanwhile, gay marriage, that line, pretty much all of the principles by which they have argued for same-sex couples to get married can be applied to extend it to other forms of, quote, marriage, like polygamous or incestuous. In other words, their principles don't serve to draw their line. It's an arbitrary decision that I think is probably politically motivated as much as anything.
Sure. And again, I've said this before, that sometimes if you just take things to their logical extension, and Francis Schaeffer used to talk about that, and the idea of taking the roof off and things like that, that every argument for abortion, in a sense, almost is, by definition, almost an argument for infanticide or euthanasia, if you take it to its logical extension. Every argument for same-sex marriage ultimately also becomes an argument for incestuous marriage, polygamous marriage, and so if you're looking to draw a line, that is not a clear, bright line. It's as fuzzy as one can possibly be.
That's right. So, but back to the main point, we have been battered by this emotionally, rhetorically powerful idea of the word equality, and we have got to stop letting them use it on us. I mean, you can't make them stop using it, but we've got to do everything we can to defuse its power just by pointing out that it's not about that.
Sure. Well, let me take a break, and when we come back, I want to get into another one. Equality is one of the arguments there, and I think you do a great job of responding to it. But again, we have it on the website for people to can read. You also, of course, go to thinkingchristian.net to find some great material by Tom. We want to come back and talk about harm and the whole idea of, well, we don't serve your kind here and those kinds of issues. And so we want to get into that issue as well. And also, just as I can do as much as I possibly can to point you to some of the other great articles by Tom Gilson. So we'll take a break, continue our conversation with him right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
As I've mentioned in various commentaries, mass shootings in America are on the increase. There are lots of theories that have been proposed to explain this dreadful phenomenon. Malcolm Gladwell has an explanation for these shootings that makes sense but is also very discouraging. He argues that we're in the midst of what could be called a slow-motion riot of mass shootings. Borrowing from the work of some sociologists, Malcolm Gladwell first argues that we should not look at these shootings in isolation but see them connected. Second, we should understand that the Columbine shooting set the cultural script. And third, we need to understand how each action lowers the next threshold. We can see this in an actual riot. The first person to throw a rock through a window lowers the threshold for someone else that might not have thrown a rock initially, but will now do so after the first rock was thrown. Then another person decides to loot the store. That lowers the threshold for the next person who might not have taken a TV in other circumstances. Each action lowers the threshold so that others who might not have taken action get involved in the riot. That brings us back to Columbine. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold set the cultural script. They had a website. They made movies. They spelled out their motivations. That made it easier for other potential shooters to follow their lead. One study found that a majority of school shooters in the 8 years after Columbine made explicit references to Harris and Klebold, and a majority of school shootings outside the United States were also versions of Columbine. The more discouraging part of his theory is that the threshold is being lowered so much that young men no longer need to be deeply disturbed to contemplate horrific acts. That seems to be what we're seeing, and unfortunately suggests that we will be seeing many more shootings in the future. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Tom Gilson with us, and again, I might point you to the article that we have posted here, or you can, of course, go to thestream.org. 3 bogus LGBT talking points you have got to say no to, but the first one we talked about is equality. Let's take the one on harm. Again, Rachel Tiven said, religious freedom under a constitution has always meant the right to believe whatever you wish, but not to act on your beliefs in a way that harm others. But you raise a good question, Tom, and that is, what harm, then, is there in telling an LGBT couple that they might be better off getting a cake done by someone who really wants to make it, by someone who would really be appreciative of having a celebration with them? And this is where I think the cases that we have in front of us right now, the case with Jack Phillips, who's just a very kind, very nice individual who really wasn't trying to be mean at all and was saying, you know, that's just not something I do, but, you know, let me point you to a bakery that can do that. Or Aaron and Melissa Klein in Oregon say, you know, I really like to get into this, and I'm not sure I do the best job. Or Baronelle Stutzman, who is the florist in Washington. We can go and use all sorts of examples. In almost every case, these are not mean-spirited people. They're just simply saying, you know, it's just not something I do. But let me see if I can provide you with an alternative or point you in the direction of somebody that would really want to do this and be enthusiastic about doing it. And so when we hear this word harm, it makes it sound like Jim Crow, segregation, just, you know, almost Nazi reaction to the Jewish population. And that's really overplaying the argument and the rhetoric, don't you think?
It is, yeah. I mean, these attempts to get the Christian non-agreeing bakers and florists to service these weddings. Some of them I think are probably intentional to make something happen that will cause a problem.
Right.
I'm not sure that was the case for the ones that we're hearing about in the news. But no, these Baronelle Stubbs, when I met her, she's so quiet she didn't even want to speak in public. She's not a mean person. She serves gay people gladly. She has done so very much. That gets to our other topic here. We don't serve your kind here.
Yeah, let's put the two together, because Masterpiece Cake Shop served LGBT people. Our print shop in Kentucky, he has homosexuals work with him and actually has produced a T-shirt for a lesbian singer, but said, I'm not going to actually create a T-shirt for a gay pride event. I mean, in every one of these cases, they bend over backwards to help whenever they can, but when you force them to write something on a T-shirt, to write something on a cake, to photograph in a particular way, or to produce floral arrangements in an event that they disagree with, well, that's when they draw the line. But in most cases, they're not treating you like somebody in a lunch counter down in the Deep South during Jim Crow America, right?
That's right. And if there were any harm, it would be that kind of thing, but there isn't. If an establishment said, we don't serve your kind here, we don't want you in this shop, we won't have anything to do with you, that would be rude. That would be discriminatory, and that would
violate the public accommodation laws too. I mean, public accommodations laws say, if you have a restaurant, you can't keep somebody out unless, of course, no shoes, no service, something like that. But I mean, the bottom line is that you can, for some health reasons, keep somebody out, but otherwise, anybody has access to that. This is different, I would say, and frankly, I think we should argue this case more on free speech issues. It's like coming in and telling a photographer, I want you to take a picture this way and I want you to light it this way, or coming in and telling a painter, I want you to paint it this way, or telling a writer, you've got to write it this way. Well, go somewhere else, because, I have the right to use my artistic talent. You can either hire me or you don't, but don't tell me how I'm supposed to do that, especially when it violates my artistic creativity.
Right. So, but there is no harm here at all, except for two things. One is the couple has to get in the car and go to another shop. And the other one is that they experience the reality that someone disagrees with them enough to make a stand for it. I can't think of anything else that is actually harming a person besides those two facts. Now, driving to another shop is small harm. Discovering that somebody disagrees with you is not news. So, if you're going to consider harm to be a balancing factor when it comes to religious freedom, you also have to balance in the harm that was done when this couple sued Jack Phillips. And, the cost, the time, the pain, the heartache, the legal fees, the hours, even though he won, he experienced harm. And it wasn't just as minor as driving down the street.
Well, again, we sort of used to, and I'm old enough to remember this, and I think you're just almost closer to my age than some of the millennials I have during our Millennial Roundtable to remember a time when we used to have this kind of live and let live philosophy. Well, you and I disagree, but that's fine. I'll let you have your view and I'll have my view. But now we have sort of the snowflake mentality, especially by those in the LGBT community. And I recognize some of these might have been accidental. First of all, when your name of your company is Masterpiece Cake Shop, you probably have a pretty good idea. We know the case out of New Mexico was actually a setup, because you had one call pretending that it was for a opposite sex wedding. Then the other partner calls back and says it's for a same-sex wedding, so they, quote, got her. So some of these are set up. Others are accidental, but in every case, I think we sort of have to say that's just the marketplace. And if we really do have somebody that's really biased, really bigoted, I think we can still solve that with public accommodation laws rightly enforced. And second of all, with just public shaming. I mean, we can say, I don't want anybody to go to that cake shop. I don't want to go anybody to that establishment because they just treat people rudely. And I think that's sufficient enough rather than having to bring every one of these cases to the Supreme Court. What do you thought?
Well, I agree. I mean, using the law as a hammer is quite a powerful step to take. Interestingly, in Washington, it wasn't the couple, though, that brought in the state. The state saw this happening through social media posts and decided, without even consulting the men, that they were going to make a case out of this, and that violates some other principles too, in my opinion. That if the person who's being, quote, harmed isn't bringing the suit, why is anybody else?
Yeah. Well, let's take a phone call or two, and then just before I let you go, we'll go to California. Joe, what's your thoughts on this particular issue?
Oh, hey, guys. I was just wondering, if all of this stuff could be just, not have to deal with it if the businesses or practices had like a plaque on their walls stating that they're a Christian business or practice with some fine print saying what they will and won't do, something like that.
Yeah, I've wondered, we've talked about that with John Stone Street about, whether you would say, look, I'll bake the cake, but I'm going to take all the profits and donate them to Focus on the Family or whatever, Exodus International. Of course, it doesn't exist anymore, that kind of stuff. You got to wonder if somewhere along the line we're going to have to think through what that might mean. And I do go to some places where they make it very clear where they stand on certain issues, doctors and other establishments, and we'll just have to see. But any final thoughts before I let you go? Because, Tom, you've done a great job of helping us kind of think through some of the so-called LGBT talking points.
Yeah, thanks. There is a wedding establishment, a farm in New York that has made a statement, by the way, of where their proceeds are donated, and that is one of the part of their answers. My final thought would be to keep your eyes open. Be careful of rhetoric. It gets used, and we tend to cower under it, and we tend to take it on an emotional level. If we would open our eyes and think it through clearly, oftentimes we find that it's a barrage of bullets that are actually blanks, and we don't need to duck. We don't need to hide. We can just stand up and answer.
Well, again, the article is posted on our website, pointofview.net. We also have a link to thinkingchristian.net. And I would certainly encourage people to find that blog and those articles. And, of course, I mentioned your book, which would be very helpful as well, a Christian Parent's Guide to Discussing Homosexuality with Teens as part of the Critical Conversations series. And as always, Tom, appreciate you joining with us. Thank you for writing for The Stream. I encourage people to go to thestream.org and find out a little bit more about some of the other things you're writing about on a regular basis. So thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kirby.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll take a few more phone calls because I know some more of you have some comments, and also want to pick up the piece that actually came out yesterday by David French entitled Against the Masterpiece Cake Shop Killjoys. There's some that are convinced that the decision this week was, as Andrew McCarthy said, a setback for liberty. But David French is more optimistic. I am too. So we'll talk about that right after this.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Got a couple of calls on the line. Let me take those first. Then we'll get to this piece that I've posted by David French, which I think is very well argued, even though I recognize that he is more optimistic about this decision that's come down than other people that have been on this program with us as well. So we'll see how this plays out. But let's go to Maine, WSEW. Steve, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Hi, yes, thank you, Kerby. I loved that conversation, and he was exactly right. It's not about equality. I think we need to stick up to that kind of thought process more often. And I was just going to make a quick analogy that, say, a group of people wanted to have a celebration, let's just say, pick one, the KKK, and they wanted to go to a cake shop, say, and have a for their celebration. Well, if it didn't align with that cake shop owner's set of moral values, their core values, they should not be required to make that product for them, because it would then be endorsing them by the. Yeah, and so I mean, it's just really common sense.
It is. And again, I've sometimes, whenever we talk about some of the LGBT issues or sex education, whatever, I take it out of the issue of sexuality for just a minute, because sometimes people's brains just kind of go boop when you start talking about sex. So I take it outside of that and say if it was something else. And this is where I think the case with Jack Phillips was good, because he has declined to bake other cakes and do other things. For example, he's never done anything for Halloween because he doesn't agree with that holiday, quotes. He has never, there was a couple of times that people wanted to have cakes that either were anti-American or, in one case, celebrating, I think on one occasion, celebrating a divorce. He said, well, I don't feel comfortable about that. Yes, divorce is legal. Yes, you can go get divorced. Doesn't mean I have to celebrate your divorce with you. Same thing. Now, same-sex marriage is legal. That doesn't mean I have to celebrate your same-sex wedding. Once you take it out of that, you can see this is really more of a free speech issue than it is even sort of a religious liberty issue. So, Steve, I think you got a good point, and I appreciate you calling today. Let's, if we can, go to Texas, KCTA Lorelda. Thank you for joining us today. What's your point of view?
Thank you, guys, for trying to keep the truth out there. I've been listening, and I sat here thinking, back in the day, it had a sign in the restaurant that just said, we have the right to refuse service to anyone. What happened to that?
The public accommodation laws changed that, yeah.
Yes. We have to split hairs. We can't stand up for Jesus anymore because then he's the one that made us great.
And again, the sad reality was those signs, and I still see them some places, but those signs existed more, but they were abused by individuals that were segregationist, racist or whatever, wouldn't allow an African-American to sit at a lunch counter or whatever it might be. But and so now there's still the right of public accommodation to refuse individuals for a couple of reasons. But as I pointed out, they're usually health reasons. You've seen the signs, no shoes, no service. Okay, those kinds of things.
Yes, yes.
But that's about it. And, because those were abused by, in many cases, evil people, others that would say, wait a minute, there are some other situations. And a good example, let's again take it out of this issue of same-sex marriage for a minute. A good example is it's almost impossible now for, even if you have a bed and breakfast, to actually prevent a couple that is not married from renting your establishment. I mean, there was a time in which we say, well, are you two married? I'm not sure I want you, share, if you want to sleep together, fine, but you're not going to do it in my house, kind of thing. And that has long gone as well. So the bottom line is that because we've moved such a far direction, you can't even enforce morality within some of the places where you have ownership. And so that's just another aspect of that. But Laurel, I appreciate you calling. We'll continue to talk about these issues. But just before we get to our conversation about the opioid crisis, which I'm going to have with the Assistant Secretary for Health for the Department of Health and Human Services, I wanted to just summarize very quickly the piece by David French, because we've had some people, I mentioned Andrew McCarthy just a minute ago, that thought that this decision was a setback for liberty. Ben Shapiro has said that he thinks religious Americans should be worried. But David French is not as concerned for 6 reasons. Reason number 1, he said Jack Phillips, that is the cake baker there in Colorado, avoided disaster. He says, as Winston Churchill said, nothing in life is so exhilarating as to be shot at without result. And going into the original arguments, a lot of people thought it would be an uphill climb for Jack Phillips to win, and he did. So that's point number 1. Point number 2, those who are convinced that Anthony Kennedy, Justice Kennedy, should rule differently in the absence of anti-religious animus, why didn't he do so in this case? The point he's making is if indeed this is just a setup for bringing the hammer down or a setup for tightening the screws in the future, he certainly didn't do that in the majority opinion in this case. Number 3, again, David French says, it may not be as easy to prevent the clean case as you think, because he talks about the fact that many of these cases come out of these state civil rights commissions. They're highly ideological. In many cases, he says they're outright hackish. And so as a result, he says they're undisciplined, they're biased as a matter of course, so it's kind of hard to find a clean case. 4th, he says even if you present the clean case, other plaintiffs have better First Amendment claims than Phillips. And the example that we've used on this program so many times, Kelly Shackelford has brought it up, Jeremiah and some of the others have brought it up as well. Chelsea Yeoman on our conversations on Wednesday with the Millennial Roundtables has, Jeremy Dice. There are a lot of people that have brought this case up, and that is the case of Aaron and Melissa Klein in Oregon. This, I think, is a much better case and most likely the next case that might make its way to the Supreme Court, and First Liberty Institute is the one behind that. That brings to our point the 5th element, and that is David French says, 5th, depending on Kennedy's retirement plans, it's highly likely that the next version of the case will be decided by a different Supreme Court. He says if Trump can appoint Gorsuch 2.0, someone with half his horsepower, thus we will have not just a bullet dodged case, we'll have a victory delayed case. And then he said, finally, Kennedy did give people of faith a lasting victory. He says the next time we see, for example, leftists using scarecrow quotes or things like that, that will certainly be the case, and talks about how he really kind of slapped down the individual in one particular case, in the Colorado case, where the commissioner basically said that Jack Phillips' religious liberty claims were a despicable piece of rhetoric, similar to arguments used to justify slavery and the Holocaust. Justice Kennedy instead, here's his quote, said, to describe a man's faith as one of the most despicable pieces of rhetoric that people can use is to disparage his religion in at least 2 distinct ways, by describing it as despicable and also by characterizing it as merely rhetorical, something insubstantial and even insincere. So David French ends by saying, in the future, when members of the media put religious liberty in scare quotes, when academics pontificate about past injustice, and when government officials echo their slurs, conservatives should remind them of Kennedy's words. They're not defending liberty, they're disparaging religion. And in certain circumstances, government officials are even breaking the law. In his last paragraph, David French puts it this way. He says, dodging a constitutional bullet, laying a minefield for future activist ideologues, paving the way for a better case before a potentially better court, rebutting a common progressive talking point. Not bad for a day's work of the Supreme Court, yet the killjoys may ultimately be proven right. Masterpiece Cake Shop may be a prelude to disaster, but I, for now, remain optimistic. The future of free speech at the Supreme Court is so bright, I have to wear shades. So, just a little bit of a piece that we've posted for you to read. I think you will find it very well written, as are so many of the articles by David French. Last time I had him in studio, I pointed out that between, I think, March and last year, I think we figured out there were like 70 or 80 articles we've posted by him. It's not that I've got this bro love for this man. It's just that every time I turn around, I look for some of the best articles, and so often they end up being articles by David French. Partially because he's a Christian, partially because he's a lawyer, and partially because he's just a really good writer. But nevertheless, we've posted his article today, and we have posted a different article by him yesterday. Let's come back and talk about the opioid epidemic. It is severe. What does one of the members of the Trump cabinet in the Department of Health and Human Services say we can do? He's got some good ideas. I want you to hear from him right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Military chaplains have been leading prayer at military events for as long as this country has had a military. But one group wants the military to silence the prayers of chaplains. In February of 2017, a group sent a letter to commanders of the Air National Guard base in Peace, New Hampshire. The letter, signed by an attorney, had the look and feel of a legal demand letter, but while it tossed around legal lingo and cited a case or two, it stopped short of actually threatening a lawsuit. Nonetheless, their message was pretty clear. Prayer at official events violates the Constitution, is beyond the scope of a government entity, and is unnecessary and divisive, it said. Our friends at the Chaplain Alliance for Religious Liberty, a group of endorsers that speaks for about half of our armed forces chaplains, asked us to respond. Mike Berry, one of our attorneys and former Marine JAG officer, calmly explained that the Constitution, federal law, military regulations, and court precedent make it clear that not only may chaplains pray at official events, chaplains are protected when they do. The Air National Guard says the invocations will now continue. You should visit firstliberty.org and read the rest of First Liberty's letter. Military chaplains play an essential role and should never be censored or prohibited from providing invocations at official military events. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you listen to this program any length of time or heard my commentaries, you know we from time to time talk about the opioid crisis, and I even mentioned recently that according to the CDC, the suspected opioid overdoses increased by almost 30% from July 2016 to September 2017. Of course, we've had front page articles in a variety of different news magazines. We've talked about some of the drug overdoses that have taken place. We certainly have a lot to talk about in that regard. And so recently I had a chance to hear an interview that was done with our next guest, and I wanted to see if we could get him on at least for a few minutes. And it is Dr. Brett Giroir, who is the Assistant Secretary for Health at the Department of Health and Human Services, also serves as a senior advisor to the Secretary on mental health and opioid policy, a graduate of Harvard University, also got his medical degree from the University of Texas Southwestern Medical School. Again, for some of you in the state of Texas, also served for a while as the Executive Vice President and CEO of Texas A&M's Health Science Center. And Dr. Giroir, it's great to have you on the program with us today here on Point of View.
It is great to be on the program. Thank you for having me.
One of the things I would like to do is talk about why this is taking place. And from your medical personnel experience, part of the problem is abuse. But let's just talk about how, in some respects, we've overprescribed these opioids. Grandma goes home with a hip replacement. She probably only needs 2 or 3 pills, maybe 2 or 3 days worth of pills, but the canister has 100 of them in there, and it seems to me that overprescribing is one of the problems. True?
You are exactly correct. This problem that we're in today has taken literally probably 2 decades to get to the point that we're in, and we know a significant factor has been the unnecessary and overprescribing of opioids, either in higher quantities or higher doses or for prolonged periods of time, so that people either can become physically dependent on them, develop an addiction to them, or, as you suggested, being in the medicine cabinet, other members of the family, particularly younger members of the family, can take them inappropriately and become addicted. And just to give you a statistic, and it varies a little bit over time and how you look at it, but somewhere between 70 and 80% of all those who use heroin now or illicit drugs started their addiction, their misuse, with prescription opioids. So that just makes your point.
Well, and again, I mentioned these news magazines. One of those was People magazine, and anybody that looked at that particular one where they featured the epidemic on the cover recognize that this is not the typical stereotype. You know, if I were Dr. Giroir talk about heroin addiction, say a couple of decades ago, since I'm a little bit older than even some of our audience, we would be thinking of somebody shooting up in a back alley. But you look there and you're recognizing that it actually some of the highest rates for those ages 45 to 54. So it isn't just a bunch of teenagers or 20-somethings in the back alleys. It's all sorts of individuals that have, in one way or another, gotten addicted to morphine, oxycodone, or something of that nature, isn't it?
Yes, sir. You're just so exactly right with everything that you're saying. 20, 30 years ago, 80% of those who used heroin started using heroin first, as opposed to today where they started using prescription opioids. These are, we've heard heartbreaking stories of great kids, high school seniors, top of their class, 1,000-hour volunteer service, but had trouble sleeping and found these pills in the cabinet, started taking them, and before you know it, particularly for the powerful opioids taken over a period of time, you're physically dependent and you can become addicted. And then asking them to stop without treatment is like asking you or I to stop breathing. It just cannot be done without medical supervision and treatment. So you're exactly right. The other thing that we need to know is 20, 30 years ago, the heroin that was on the street was really cut so many times because of the way that the dealers did it, that it was very, very impure and very diluted. Today, the heroin on the street is frighteningly pure. The heroin, the black tar heroin, usually coming from Mexico, so it's 50, 60, 80% pure. And what makes it even worse now, the cheap synthetic opioids, meaning the one that you can make in a chemistry lab that you don't need to grow in poppies, primarily grown from China, sent from China by the mail, is 100 or 1,000 times more potent than even heroin or the morphine. So this is where people who start on prescription drugs, when those go away, they transition to cheap heroin, and that heroin supply is now transitioning to ultra-cheap but highly ultra-potent and deadly fentanyl. You might have seen last week that in just one bust in the Midwest, there was enough fentanyl to potentially kill 30 million people in one bust. So this is absolutely the most important public health issue of our time. And thank goodness that we have an administration that has taken this with the utmost seriousness and has mobilized a whole of government approach, of which I'm very proud and honored to be part of.
Well, again, I appreciate you being there. There are all sorts of policy things we can talk about, and we have and will in the future. But one that I thought I might talk about for just a minute, since you're a doctor, is that there is kind of a buyback or a bring back situation, because right now some of our listeners will talk about future policies in terms of drug enforcement. But one very simple thing is, if you've got something that right now is in your medicine cabinet, there are some opportunities for you to turn it back. Don't flush it down. We don't want it to go into the water supply. But talk about that issue, since we only have about 2 minutes left with the interview for you today.
Yes, it's very important to rid yourself of excess opioids. We have national take-back days, which occur several times a year. Our last one nationally, we collected over 950,000 pounds of pills. Most local pharmacies, most insurance plans will have a place to come bring back your drugs to the pharmacy. There are services that you can have that you can deactivate your drugs and then put them in an envelope. It really just depends where you are, but these are all over. But the most important thing is, if you have opioids, and know what an opioid is: OxyContin, Tramadol, Percocet. They go by many different brand names. You can come to our website and learn about it. You go to the CDC website and learn about it. If you're not using it, just think of that as the worst poison on earth in your medicine cabinet, because it is, if taken outside of doctor's orders or taken inappropriately. And get it back. Get it away from your home. You don't need it. If you need another prescription in the future, the physician or the nurse practitioner or someone will give you the right drug at the right quantity and the right time.
I might just mention, we do have a link to the Department of Health and Human Services, and it takes you to your bio, but then from there you can find some of those other opportunities. And as you can see, Dr. Gerard, we really believe this is an important issue, so I hope we can chat with you again in the future and talk about drug policy and a number of other things, and I just couldn't be more thrilled that you are in that position right now in the Trump administration.
Well, thank you so much, and I want to be available to you and anyone in this administration, because this is a whole of government approach, and even starting today, the president has put forth a really bold initiative to educate our youth, and you'll be seeing this on the airwaves and the digital media, because as anything, as you know, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and so we would really like this tragic situation to be prevented, and the president is all behind that. So I'm so proud to work in this administration.
Well, again, appreciate you being with us, and that's all we have for today. Let's encourage you to find some of the resources. Of course, if you go to the Viewpoints commentary, you'll see that I've posted a couple of commentaries, give you some of the facts and figures about that. And, of course, you can find out more about Dr. Gerard, who is, again, Assistant Secretary for Health with the Department of Health and Human Services. Had a chance to hear him on with Mark Davis the other day, and said we need to get him on here, and we'll do that again, because this is an important crisis and issue. That's all we have for today. Want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help and work behind the scenes. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Why does Kerby Anderson do what he does? Because he believes in God's ability to use you to make a difference.
There's a real need for us to articulate a responsible biblical perspective and to give people an understanding of what is happening in the world, and in addition to educating them, to then empower them to go out and make a difference for Christ.
Together we can push back the growing darkness. It's not going to be easy, but by God's grace it is happening, one person, one community at a time. Join us in this mission. Become a monthly partner. $1 a day, $30 a month will make a huge difference. Or perhaps you can do $100 a month. We need partners of all sizes. We need you. Give today online at pointofview.net. At the top of the page, next to the Donate Now button, click on Become a Monthly Partner. Pointofview.net. Mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, or call 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.